Well, hey there, everybody. I just
Sorry.
wanted to say welcome. Hey,
I was
Lisa.
on mute. I was on mute. I got the other part right. Welcome to this week's 5, 8.5. The heat is on, and so glad to see you, Nadine. I'm going to put the banner up.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Yeah,
Uh,
the 5, 8.5, your midweek break. I'm Nadine Smith alongside Lisa Graves. And you know the format, 5 stories, 8 minutes, and a chance to refuel. So what's new? Speaking of refueling, how are you? How have you been holding up?
well,
It's the end of the world as we know it.
yeah, it's been one of those. It's been one of those weeks. Just when you think, just when you're afraid to come out of the water, go into the water. I don't know which it is.
Actually, it is the anniversary of Jaws.
It is. It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
That movie traumatized me. It was raining the day I came out of that movie, and I was too terrified to walk into in water puddles. And now people celebrate Jaws by watching it while they float in a swimming pool. I
No
could
way.
never.
Between
I
that
could never.
between that and the Piranha movie, I stayed away from the swimming pool for a while, even though it was irrational. I knew the swimming pool in my neighborhood had neither piranhas nor sharks, but there was just something about it that was freaky. Yeah,
Yeah.
super scary. Both shows.
Childhood traumas.
Yeah, and now
Imaginary fears.
yeah, I'm having a bit of a redux, given what's been happening. We'll talk about Iran in a moment, but you know, everything that's old is new again, apparently, as we continue to toil under this mad king. So it's been a week. How about you? How's your week been?
My week has been well, I will tell you that I have significant evidence that I'm struggling with midlife crisis because um, the night, let's see, what is
You
it,
bought a
Wednesday?
convertible on the fly?
Sunday night and Monday night, I made my comedy debut. I played the Comedy Zone in Jacksonville and the
Wow.
Funny Bone in Tampa. I know it sounds absolutely preposterous, and yet it's all true. An amazing comic named Alok. If you don't know Alok, I highly recommend you look up Alok Vade Menchon. They are, just top drawer, and did a fundraiser for Equality Florida at both shows. Dedicated all the merchandise to Equality Florida, and asked me to open. And before I knew it, I had said yes, and suddenly went into existential panic. But you know what? There's nothing like teetering on the verge of World War III to put, the possibility of bombing on stage into perspective. So onward I went, and I did fine. I did well from all reports. I have not had to fake my own death and start a life anew on some island. So all is well. All
I
is
would have
well.
known that you would be amazing at it, Nadine.
It's well,
Awesome to hear.
I will say this: Alok has a theory, and I'm a subscriber to it, that America, the world, would be so much better if everybody had to do 15 minutes of open mic, because you do kind of plumb the depths, and it is a space of grace, and it's a reminder that we are all just trying to figure it out. We are all
Yeah.
unfinished works, just trying to figure it out, and there you have it. So.
Well, that's a great opening to one of the reasons why there's been so much anxiety,
It's
which is our first topic: Iran fallout. I'm going to put the timer on since that's also
okay.
one of my technical jobs.
We are
Yeah.
really gonna do it.
Yep. I'm doing it. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, of course. What a time. Nothing like the brink of World War III to bring things into focus. So, as everybody knows, the U.S. bombed Iranian nuclear sites, despite plenty of intelligence saying that Iran was no closer to actually building nuclear weapons. Even U.S. All of them, U.S., U.K., German, all of Russian intelligence, all saying Iran does not have this capability. Nonetheless, Trump said U.S. intelligence is wrong, authorized the strikes, and Then we ended up with conflicting information. Did they do devastating damage? Was it minimal damage? The scariest part are reports that other countries are now saying if they didn't have nukes before, they will have them soon because they will see to it. And of course, now Iran has voted to close the Straits of Hormuz. That's pending some kind of final approval. I don't know what that process is. And I think the isn't there a meme now of Trump put out a tweet saying there's a ceasefire. I've told them all, no, this is it. And 6 minutes after his absolute assurance that there's a ceasefire came a tweet from Iran saying we just bombed from Israel saying we just bombed Iran. So for the first time, you saw Trump lashing out at both countries, but with particular vigor towards Israel. So who knows? Who knows what comes next? But yeah, that is the state of things thus far. Energy markets, of course, are on edge because the Straits of Hormuz are a choke point for a significant amount of oil, and if that happens, I mean, there's a lot of speculation on will it happen? What does it mean? Will it hurt China more than the U.S.? But basically, they've taken the global map and just shaken it like a snow globe. And anyone who says they know precisely how all of this is unfolding, I do not trust.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. I grew up in my political science studies learning about the international crisis around the Cuban Missile Crisis and the groupthink and the concern about groupthink happening at the White House. And that was a White House that was, staffed by a president who had served in World War II, had served honorably, along with advisors who were in the top of their fields in the middle of the Cold War. And it's certainly fair to say that the men in the White House and the women too, who may be advising Trump, can't hold a candle to the, intellectual strength of that Kennedy White House. And it too made, it made foreign policy mistakes, but, on the brink of a real clash with the Soviet Union over Cuba, there was a concerted effort to really test the theories. And I just, I can't believe that there's been that sort of rigor in this White House. And with this Secretary of Defense, with Hegseth, and Rubio and Vance, it's like you have children in charge of not just the toys of war, but really serious weapons of war and short-term, medium-term, and long-term consequences of this sort of engagement. And the decision to join Israel's efforts, even in the aftermath of what we've seen over the past year and years, really, in terms of the fragility of peace or the lack of peace in the Middle East, and all the different, sort of chess pieces of who's aligned with who, and are the Saudis with us, and Jared Kushner's role, basically,
Right.
Aiding the Saudis and then getting super rich from the investments of the Saudis afterward. Like there's so many complicated dynamics in the Middle East, and then there's graft and opportunism, and then on top of it all, you have real serious weapons in that region. And like you said, you have these competing claims of the so-called success of this bombing mission, or the failure of this bombing mission. And then you have Trump's now, memeing claims about people not knowing what the fuck they're doing, which, certainly seems like a confession to me on his part.
Everything he accuses other people of. I mean, he's guilty of, right? But here's the thing, you can never look at his actions without sending it through a lens of what self-serving interest is at the heart of this decision? Is it there was the largest protest in U.S. history, and he wants to take, the No Kings protest out of the headlines? Is it some other, machination? Is he
The poor attendance at his birthday parade.
at his birthday, because everybody was talking about the squeaky tank? Is he being blackmailed? Is he in the Epstein file? You never know. And these would be things that I would dismiss as wild conspiracy conjecture, except that it is him. And that he has shown time and time again a willingness to do it. Now, you said toys, children and toys. And it made me think about the person that is at the helm of the U.S. terror prevention, who is a 22-year-old named Thomas Fugate III, I think is his name. But like, at a moment that you are bombing Iran, at a moment that Iran has now launched missiles at military bases where U.S. soldiers are, so far no one has been hurt by it, but you've put in charge of counterterrorism, somebody who's barely out of college. And this is the lack of seriousness. This is the lack of any depth or. So yes, we are in a very strange timeline, and somebody said the confusion is purposeful. So I think it is important that anytime we talk about Iran, we must also talk about No Kings, the fact that Trump's numbers are continuing to decline, and there's always a tweet. And this time there's probably 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tweets of him saying Barack Obama is going to bomb around because his numbers are looking bad. His next move when things are desperate will be to bomb Iran. Like, every single thing is a confession. He is clearly trying to take attention away from the ugliness that he has created, the attack on healthcare, the attack on Medicaid, all of these things. So here we are in the midst of the maelstrom.
It really is. That was the alarm, but I'm gonna add an additional thought in here because, the idea that there is someone who just has barely graduated from college in charge of a significant component of our national security. Back in 2001, when I was at the Justice Department, and all these Schedule C political appointees flooded in, Ted Cruz and others came in because they'd worked on the Bush campaign. And as soon as the inauguration was over, they came into the sort of the policy shop, the leadership at the Justice Department. And there was one guy who I won't name, but who came in who was just like this guy, a recent college graduate. And he informed me when he came by my office that he was going to be working on national security. And I informed him that there was no way he was going to be working on national security because he had no experience in the field and didn't even have his clearance yet. When he gave me his resume noted that he had a trimester of work with a mayor's office. And his description of his work was that he, in that 3-week period, learned everything there was to know about municipal government. And I thought, this guy is really not the type of person who you need to be making rational, sober recommendations about how to handle our national security. But there are many of those types of individuals who, have connections versus wisdom, and somehow are getting positions, or loyalty versus skill.
Loyalty is everything.
Yeah. And so that's the administration we have. We had an administration that prizes loyalty to Trump personally above every other factor, law, common sense, et cetera. And that, these decisions, I think, are emblematic of that problem, the problem we face. And it's not just a problem that we face, it's a problem that the world is facing. But here at home, we have other problems. We have people being nominated for judgeships who not only should not be ever put into a position of power over other people as a judge, but actually should be removed from power at the Justice Department. And of course, I'm talking about Emile Beauvais. It's funny because his name may in fact be pronounced Beauvais. It seems a little bit presumptuous. And I say that as someone who whose last name is Graves, and I learned only later as a 20-something that there was a famous vineyard in France called the Graves Vineyard, and I could have been going around saying, Graves, what are you, crazy? My name is Graves this whole time. But instead, it's Lisa Graves. Didn't put on any airs, but that's the least of our concerns with Emile Beauvais, which is, he's a guy who is rewarded with a position at the height of the Justice Department because of his loyalty to Trump, his service to Trump. And then he used that post in many ways, one of which was to try to execute one of the most unconscionable plea agreements I've ever heard reported, which was the notion that the Justice Department would dismiss the very serious evidence-based charges against the current mayor of New York for corruption, like very substantial allegations, would dismiss that indictment against him. In essence, the word on the street was if he would just go along with the Trump administration's desire to unleash ICE in whatever way they wanted in New York City, but not to dismiss it with prejudice, just have it hanging over him as a potential extortion risk, which the federal judge who was presiding over that case rejected and insisted that if they were going to dismiss the charges against the mayor of New York, they were going to dismiss them all so that with prejudice, so they couldn't be refiled. So it wouldn't be a way to squeeze this mayor. Now, I don't think they should have been dismissed at all based on the evidence that was alleged and the grand jury found. But Emile Beauvais executed that plan, and it resulted in some career professionals resigning from the Justice Department. But that's not all. There's new reports of a whistleblower who has attested that Emile Beauvais was telling lawyers to ignore court orders. Which he denied in his hearing today, but I think he denied it in a way that I personally find to be not incredible.
Right. He said he couldn't remember, right? He was like, I don't remember that quote. I don't remember subverting the Constitution. Those things kind of stick.
Yeah. And I think Senator Schiff and Senator Whitehouse and others really did a very good job of cross-examining him. But that was in the aftermath and amidst this ridiculous, really grotesque love fest by these Republican senators toward Beauvais, who should never have been nominated. When in a normal administration that actually prized experience, fairness, impartiality, Beauvais would never be nominated to a judicial position at the district court or the appellate court level. I don't think he should be nominated to be like a judge at a pie contest, a bakery contest. He is someone who I don't think warrants that kind of trust based on his track record. But there he was today, and people can look up the clips from some of those questions by senators. But the Republicans basically signaled that sort of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, that they are willing to go along with this appointment of Beauvais. And even in spite of this new whistleblower evidence, which is very troubling and revealing at least one and more perspectives of what's been happening in the Justice Department that is consistent with what we've been seeing in court by some of these Trump Justice Department appointees, dodging questions by judges, trying to avoid making him as the judges. And in fact, the reality that Pam Bondi fired the head of the Office of Immigration Litigation, who argued one of the initial cases involving the exile of people to the hellhole in El Salvador for admitting in court that there were no criminal charges that Camille Abrego Garcia was facing. They had never been convicted, and they did not have evidence to warrant his removal, but they were nevertheless justifying the removal as within the president's supposedly vast powers. So Emile Beauvais, yet another ignominious, in my personal opinion, judicial nominee by Donald Trump to reward his loyalists with key positions of power within the federal judicial system.
It's really chilling. It's chilling to see the lawlessness. I mean, from the pardons of January 6th to going after people within the Department of Justice who are doing their job responsibly. And again, there's a difference. Part of the reason that they love these, not just the loyalists, when we were talking about the counterterrorism 22-year-old, to them, these are people you don't have to break and retrain. You get them young and you form them in your own image. And they either are loyal or stooges. That is all they want in this administration. Somebody was pointing out that, the physical similarities between Stephen Miller and Beauvais. And I have to agree, they seem to be shaped psychologically and physically by some malevolent forces that have created within them this complete disregard for human life. Authorizing deportations through Guantanamo and the Department of Defense to avoid court oversight, coordinating the stonewalling and avoiding of documentation. It is so painful to watch these hearings, all of them, because they've clearly been coached to not even answer the most basic questions as a real human being would. But hopefully we are finally hitting up against a breaking point, because there will be one. And the question of how quickly that breaking point comes, the harder it is for Trump to sell his domestic agenda, the more we will see these international misadventures. But at the heart of it is always, what is the play? Whose pocket is he lining in addition to his own? Because ideologically, he's whatever he thinks he needs to be.
Well, that's right. I mean, when you look at this appointment of this attempt to put Beauvais on the Third Circuit, that's the circuit that has jurisdiction over New Jersey, where Trump owns some real estate. And so, he has paid particular attention to judges and U.S. attorneys who have oversight over places where he holds property, as we saw with his assailing the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. In his first administration, we saw with the appointment of the, incredibly unqualified, in my opinion, Judge Eileen Cannon to be in the district that has jurisdiction over Mar-a-Lago. And now you have Trump trying to put his lawyer basically on the court in the Third Circuit, which has jurisdiction over some of his property in New Jersey that could be contested in some form or another, depending on how things all go down. But the other thing that has happened with people like Beauvais is, and I wrote about this for Truth Out this past week, is that Pam Bondi has directed judicial nominees of Trump to not cooperate with the American Bar Association's ratings review. And so I used to lead the team, the working group. I was a staff leader of the working group on judicial nominations at the Justice Department. And we worked closely with the American Bar Association before people were nominated to get a sense of whether the person who a senator or a legislator had recommended for judgeship, whether they had good connections or good character. And whether they had a reputation within the bar, the bar that has jurisdiction over their legal practice, whether their reputation was one of fairness or whether it was one that was one of untrustworthiness in the view of their peers. And so when we would receive a rating of a potential nominee as not qualified or partial not qualified, we would typically not proceed with that nomination. We would go back to the drawing board. But we saw with Trump in the first term, some of the people he chose were getting not qualified or partial not qualified ratings. And that was when the ABA was removed previously from the pre-nomination process to the post-nomination process, which is an area where people may be afraid to speak out about concerns about a nominee because they're likely to get confirmed once they're nominated. But even then, some of Trump's appointees had such terrible records, or they were like basically a blogger being rewarded with a judgeship, that they were getting poor ratings. So now, this second Trump term, they have directed people like Bove not to fill out the questionnaire by the American Bar Association, not to answer questions from them, not to be interviewed by them, and basically try to cut the ABA out of the process, which they've had for decades, of trying to help ensure that the people who are nominated aren't hacks and quacks and people who are just, politicos. politicians to serve in black robes. That's not always successful, but the basis of it is that. And so that's another thing that's happened. So Bove did not go through that ABA review process, as far as I understand it, has not received a rating, will not cooperate with the ratings process by the American Bar Association, the largest body of attorneys in the country.
Yeah. Well, this attack on expertise, treating expertise like it's a liability rather than a help. We saw it so much earlier certainly in Florida, and I imagine elsewhere, where Republican candidates stopped even trying to get the endorsement of major newspapers. They wouldn't participate in that process, and then turned all of their attention into attacking the newspaper for endorsing their opponent. And, so this attack on expertise is also about basically getting rid of any watchdogs, anyone that can call them out, anyone that can challenge their credentials. And, so for them, it's not a problem that the ABA doesn't screen, because, to them, that's a badge of honor. And we see it in healthcare, we see it in education, we see it in nominations. So
yeah,
we're going to have to untangle, we're going to have to figure out how knowing what you're doing is actually no longer a deficit as it is in this timeline.
Yeah,
so.
It really is extraordinary. And I just want to flag that there was a new report out where someone did the analysis of how before lower court judges from different presidents, from Bush to Obama to even Trump 1 judges, Biden judges, that the Trump administration has lost more than 95% of the time at the lower courts. But according to that analysis, which we've all seen unfold over the past few months, Trump has won more than 95% of the time with the Supreme Court in the 15 cases that have reached it, where John Roberts and the Republican appointees have gone out of their way to basically overturn lower court restraining orders against Trump, with the one exception of saying that they needed to facilitate the return of Abrigo Garcia. And the most recent shadow docket decision this week on allowing these third-party deportations or third-country deportations, pushing people into countries they've never been to, have no contact with, and doing so now with the blessing of the Republican appointees to the United States Supreme Court. Again, people who were handpicked by Leonard Leo, aided in their appointments by Leonard Leo, who, as I pointed out in that Truth Out article, has been gunning for getting rid of merit selection processes like the ABA and state processes for a long time. Because why do you want some independent party rating your judges when you're actually picking them for loyalty to your agenda, not based on their actual reputation or their reputation for fairness?
Yep. Well, speaking of the awful U.S. Supreme Court, I think now's a good time for us to segue to our third segment on post-Roe America. We are 3 years after the Dobbs decision. 17 states enforce near total abortion bans. We're looking at a OBGYN shortage, and maternal mortality is rising. And we are seeing good neonatal, all of the infrastructure that is built around reproductive health care, abortion access, all of those things are leaving places. And that means even for those who are not seeking an abortion, they are losing expertise in these areas. But I think if there were one story that epitomized the sheer hypocrisy and the ugliness of these bans, it unfolded in Florida over the last week. There's a Florida lawmaker named Kat Kamick. She ended up with an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured, left her in the emergency room. And these are extremely dangerous.
Yep.
And when I say it epitomizes everything that's wrong, here's somebody who as a Republican lawmaker, is telling the emergency room with doctors who are terrified for very good reason that if they make a call that her life is in danger and therefore we must act, and it ends up in front of a right-wing jury in Florida with a extremist prosecutor second guessing whether or not she was close enough to death to warrant the action. What all of these, they have to navigate all of these things. But here she is saying, I'm a Republican lawmaker who supported this law, and here's what it does. Not a judge, just this lawmaker. She even got the governor's office on the phone for the purpose of calling on them to reassure this hospital, this medical team, that they would not face potentially murder charges. In a state where all of this rhetoric is being floated. And what happened? She got the abortion. They provided the medical care. But how many of us walk around, being able to say, hey, I'm a lawmaker. I'm part of the majority party. I've got the governor's cell phone. I will have their office weigh in to ensure that we get the kind of health care that ought to be available. It is always this way. They will continue to access abortion care because they will rig the system, whether it's financially to gain access or this prime example that we live in a state that would have denied that until it was absolutely a borderline call of life and death. And we've already seen examples of people who did not survive or because they were forced to wait so long will never have children. And that is where we are in the state of Florida, 3 years after Dobbs and after these extraordinary bans that functionally create full abortion bans.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Florida has been, as you know so well, Nadine, one of the real focal points of this right-wing extreme agenda. But it has been happening in states across the country, including Georgia. I wrote about that today for Courier on my Grave Injustice Substack to talk about, 3 years after Dobbs, what's been happening, for example, in Georgia, where doctors have been afraid because of the criminalization. They could be charged with a crime if they perform an abortion after 6 weeks. And a couple, many people have been affected by that, but obviously some women have died. And then most recently, one woman actually died as a pregnant woman, and they kept her on life support for 4 months as her body sort of declined after she was declared brain dead, because she was 9 months pregnant when she died. And then over the objections of her family, they kept her on machines until this past week, when they conducted a C-section. And now she's going to be laid to rest this weekend. And so you have this idea of fetal rights trumping the rights of women and their families. And you have this as the result of this really repugnant ruling by Sam Alito on the Supreme Court with his Republican appointees to uphold Mississippi's bar, the 15-week bar versus the earlier 6-week bar on abortions. And as I point out, doing so based in part on the rancid claims of a jurist in England from more than 300 years ago who was, responsible for having women murdered for supposed witchcraft, for coming to someone's door and not getting food, that they supposedly were witches. I mean, so this guy who Alito then credits, is one of the bases for Alito's claims about abortion, the right to access abortion in the United States. It's just really horrific. But then you have, along with this sort of right-wing white focus on natalism or pronatalism, of trying to have more whites have more babies, as we saw from that sort of "you will not replace us" Nazi march in Charlottesville and some of the other rhetoric we've seen coming out of white Christian nationalists. But you've had this happening, and one of the proponents of this so-called natalism is Charlie Kirk, who leads a group called Turning Point USA. They had a big conference for young women this past week in Texas. And at that meeting, Charlie Kirk, who has just bear hugged Donald Trump and done everything he can to promote Donald Trump, claimed that the only degrees that young women should be seeking out are MRS degrees, and said to a room full of women that basically getting a husband should be their first priority, their top priority, their purpose for being. And so you really do have this extraordinary, combination of this effort to limit access to abortion. And some of these groups, like Students for Life, want to limit access to contraception as well. And then you have these other related groups that are also anti-abortion that are trying to tell women, don't go to college, get married young, have kids, do not pursue, other dreams, that other dreams are illegitimate. And you have it being sold to them by these MAGA, Maha influencers who are getting rich selling a glamorized version of reality, and the reality of raising a family, which is hard work, real work. It's not all Instagram. It's really hard work, some of the hardest work on the planet. And the idea that women should not be able to pursue their dreams, be able to control their destiny, have control over when and if they have children. It's all part and parcel of this very theocratic scheme to push America back decades, if not centuries.
It's absolutely chilling. I mean, the brain dead woman in Georgia, the emergency C-section, the word that you wanted to avoid was they delivered this, that her body was decomposing. I mean, there's so many metaphors for how they see women as just functional, incubators. And I think that this is one of those moments where we have to confront so many things at once. The racism that is at the core of this is without a doubt, right? They will not replace us crowd, the incel crowd, this entire idea that part of the problem is that women should never have been able to vote, that women have left their proper function, which is to marry and make as many white babies as possible. All of these things that, it used to be the subtext, but they say it very plainly right now. And so the reason that you have to be concerned, like the Scrimetti decision that came down, right? This is a decision where the court had a choice between parents, doctors, the needs of transgender young people, or politicians. And the court chose politicians. You don't get to have a say in what your child needs. Science and the best medical care you can access have nothing to say. At the end of the day, the decision that gets made in your household will be decided by the governor and the state legislature. That's what the Supreme Court said. But these things are all tied together, because it is also true with abortion. Like, they sharpen their sword on whoever they see as most vulnerable, but they are sharpening that sword to come for everyone that stands in the way of their agenda. So you don't have to be a parent of a trans kid to understand how Scrimetti is immediately a danger to you. You do not have to be someone who fears getting pregnant to understand that they seek to reduce the definition of women to a reproductive function and to enforce that idea. So you don't have to be a transgender woman to understand how dangerous it is for this kind of ideology to begin to circumscribe the healthcare you can have access to, the rights that you have, regardless of where you are in the country. And it is really quite chilling to know that I have no idea what condition the baby cut out of this dead woman's body, kept alive in the most, I mean, we are in Matrix territory right now.
Yeah.
And how the slippery slope between that and deciding that, I don't know, women who are prisoners should have to serve this function. Like, that seems like outrageous and absurd, but we are in that world now where those kind of things are not off the table.
No, and that, like, I remember during Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court, one of the issues was a decision that he was involved in as a DC Circuit Court judge, which was about whether a young woman who was in immigration detention could be allowed to access abortion services. And there was an effort to keep her pregnant against her will, merely because she was an immigrant, when certainly
Yeah.
they could have allowed her access.
No, it's chilling.
Yeah. And so this notion.
I can't tell whether you've frozen or
Oh.
I've frozen.
All
One
right.
of us has.
All right. I'm going to go off camera and toss it back to you for grok.
Okay. Listen, I think, all right. Well, I think I checked out there for a second, but, or my camera went off for a moment. So Grok, let's talk about Grok and the reboot of Grok. So for anyone who hasn't been following this, Elon Musk announced that there was going to be a reboot of the AI attached to Twitter, his AI. Now, you have to recall that this comes after he was caught trying to reconfigure Grok to support an analysis that white South Afrikaners were an oppressed minority, and that in this world of that he would, in this messaging that he was trying to support Trump fast tracking these white farmers with completely made up phony stories of mass slaughter of white South Afrikaners after the fall of apartheid. Grok called out, they did it in such a sloppy manner that
Right.
that when people were putting in other requests and having these weird talking points about white South Afrikaners show up in their the response from Grok. And finally someone said, "Grok, why is this happening?" And it said, basically, my maker has been tinkering with my algorithms to, input this information. So, Musk has made it perfectly clear that he is willing to take AI and manufacture what its outputs are. This is particularly dangerous because, we've gone from ChatGPT and these other, Claude, Grok, being kind of, people are aware of them, but they haven't replaced Google quite yet. But we are on an accelerated S curve of adoption. So much so there was a story in the paper today or yesterday. Listen to me saying the paper as though I'm reading a newspaper. Where
a digital newspaper.
Right. But it was about a woman, I think, suing her university because her professors were using ChatGPT. Usually we're hearing the other story of professors. What will we do with all of this? But it has become so ubiquitous, the way that people use it. And I'm reminded of interviewing on wideawakeamerica.org. I was interviewing a reporter from who was based in Ukraine. And he was talking about how they were working to preserve Ukrainian culture, because part of what he said, what's hard for you to understand, because when you think of colonialism, you think of white Europeans colonizing Black and brown people, but we are a colonized people. And part of that has been the destruction of our language, of our history, of our culture, and that part of the occupying force of Russia in towns that they occupy, was to take, family albums, picture albums, things that hearken to Ukrainian history, and destroy them. And the children would then be put in, Russian-speaking schools to learn Russian history. But there are more than one way to burn down libraries. And when you begin to make AI the new library, and the builders of it are able to hack into that library and adjust it in ways, perhaps not as clumsily as he did the first time, but how quickly that dial can, 1 degree at a time, boil us like frogs, ought to send chills up everybody's spine because it can be done. You know, we can get up in arms about book bans, we can protest them, we can talk about book banners, but these kind of dial changes that are not visible to us, that over time begin to erase part of our history and replace it with this propaganda, will happen at such tiny increments that right now, preserving our history, preserving this information, because we're dealing with an administration that is happy to erase history completely, to ban, as they have done in Florida under AP African American Studies, to take Harvey Milk's name off of a U.S. Naval ship. All of these things that they are willing to do in public to erase history may end up being nothing compared to what they're willing and able to do quietly and privately by manipulating AI to burn the libraries. So yes, even if you're not on Twitter, you should be wide awake to the fact that what happens with this new storehouse of human knowledge called AI to distort and to distort our history and shape our future.
I mean, that is just so well put, Nadine. And this idea that the invisible hand, in essence, but not so invisible to Grok, but invisible hand to us, of Musk trying to tweak or alter the algorithm to get it to manufacture history, to manufacture reality. This is an enormous threat, especially as we see how much people are actually relying on AI, and how in some ways it's just being infused into all sorts of apps. Now on Google, the top response to questions is an AI response, not necessarily the website that has been most seen or most used as a source of information. In theory, that is derived in part through the algorithm on those answers that are below the fold, as we used to say with paper. But in fact, we don't know. We don't know all the things that are going into those systems, but we obviously can see through Grok this hand of Musk trying to alter reality. But we also see some other threats in addition to the ones you flagged, which are just this week. The Trump administration has announced that there will be limited access to the National Archives, which belongs to all of us, which is the repository of our historical documents. We've seen him try to replace the head of the Library of Congress, not the Library of the Administration, but now to go in and limit access to the National Archives. It really does raise the question of who will have access to the archives and whether things will be just physical things will be destroyed within our libraries, our archives. And so this assault on truth, the assault on history, on facts, is proceeding both in a digital way and in a physical, sort of brick and mortar way. It really is an enormous threat to the truth. And the truth, the founding fathers, who, were flawed men, obviously, they embraced the absolute repugnant Southern state demand for the 3/5 so-called compromise. But they also insisted, the founding generation that ratified the Constitution, the white men who ratified the Constitution, they insisted that there be a First Amendment that protected freedom of the press, because that generation recognized in just the few centuries after the printing press was a reality, that having a free press was important for educating people, informing their understanding of our policies, of our nation. And we now see all of these institutions of civil society, these pillars of civil society, including the press, being distorted by predominantly distorted by right-wing billionaire interests and this president
Yeah.
and his men and people. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when you think about the time when the masses were not permitted to read the Bible or have access to books, and the ruling class sort of controlled people by having them have to go to this small cadre that had access to these documents.
Yeah.
But, when it doesn't matter whether or not you use Grok, you are on Twitter, but, Grok has now generated Holocaust denial, white nationalist myths, misinformation on apartheid and civil rights, and Grok is now part of Tesla's Optimus robot. And, what does this mean that the autonomous, taxis that are rolling out this week are also connected to to this Grok, uh, tool?
Yeah.
So it is a walking, driving, ubiquitous propaganda tool, and
Yeah.
we have to get real about it. And there actually has been within academic circles sort of a rush to preserve, documents, but as you say, even, the head of the Library of Congress redid this whole display on, just as Trump was coming into power, and, like, removed something that had, Dr. King in it and
Yep.
replaced it, I think, with Elvis shaking hands with Nixon, you know, and what people don't seem to understand is you cannot capitulate enough. You will never stop them from coming at you by capitulating to them. You have just signaled your weakness and willingness to
Yep.
fold. And so right now we need the people who have their hands on these treasured documents to be copying them and then putting them up on servers that are outside of the reach of this government.
Yep.
Putting them on. We have to be just like the people in Ukraine who are in these contested territories protecting the information that they would seek to destroy. And that is a hard thing. That is a hard thing to look at.
Yeah. So the document preservation brigade, the amazing librarians of the world, the archivists of the world who we're counting on to help protect these documents, our history from these marauding forces, from these pirates, basically.
Yes. And the good news is, cue segue, that
Yes.
there are people fighting back. There are people who are witnessing this, who are seeing these book bans against, African American history, LGBTQ content. And in response, one of the things we're seeing is freedom schools are taking off. They're spreading at a rate that we haven't seen since the 60s. Do-it-yourself libraries. More and more people are using encrypted apps, using PDF drops. They're doing things in order to create alternatives to what is being dismantled and what is being built by this administration. And it really does echo the civil rights freedom schools. And so one of the things that can be really hard in the midst of all of this, and I don't know whether you struggle with this, Lisa, but we find ourselves so often defending systems that we have plenty of critiques about. It's like, we are defending in institutions that we see as flawed, but we know that their motivation for dismantling that institution isn't to improve it. It is
Right.
to destroy what the good thing that actually is functioning to do. And so part of what I think is exciting about the freedom schools and this librarian movement and these do-it-yourself libraries, and people saying, you know what, as we see in other countries where, parallel polis, you begin to create the world that you want to live in. You begin to create the structures as they ought to be. You begin to create an economy based on barter. You begin to do all of these kinds of things, like the Black Panthers, creating a free, breakfast program for kids. That's when the government got violent, not because they were protesting, but because they were actually responding to needs in the community. And so I think right now we're beginning to see that level of creativity and engagement and strategy and communities coming together. And I certainly see it in Florida, a place that has been, sort of the test kitchen for a lot of these horrific, hateful recipes.
Yeah.
They ban books, and those books fly off the shelves, and people begin to build a strategy to ensure that anything they try to suppress, we give it more altitude, more visibility, more momentum. So
Yeah.
there's some threads in there that are well worth everybody who's horrified by what we're talking about when we're talking about Grok and Averti walking around with anxiety about how much AI is reshaping our ability to think. I saw a study that came out quite recently that was studying people who use AI all the time and the architecture of their brain and people who don't. And there are important pieces of critical thinking that are withering in people who rely overwhelmingly on AI, and it is a very seductive thing. And when I say seductive, I mean it quite bluntly, because now there are support groups for people who are in love with the AI avatars they've created as their companions. We'll
Wow.
save that for another show. We'll bring somebody on who can talk about it, but it is a real phenomenon that is beginning to unfold.
Who knew those Greek myths about Narcissus and more would just become, redeployed, recycled in this new era with new technology. Yeah, just extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, I join you in saluting the librarians and the efforts to celebrate banned book weeks and buy those books like Mouse and others that have
Yes.
been barred, and try to make sure that people, including kids, have access to information about if a classmate has two mommies or two daddies, like this is part of human society, part of our society, to have people have parents who love them, and not have this glorification of heterosexual marriage as the only way to raise a family. It's simply not. And actually having multi-generational support for raising families is also such an important tradition that has helped really nurture kids. I know for myself, having grandmothers in my life made an enormous difference to me, along with having amazing public school teachers who weren't teaching to the test, but were trying to teach about ethics and kindness and embrace creativity and give us the opportunity in public schools to try new things, try out music, try out different sports, try new things. And that whole system, this system that really helped America thrive in a lot of ways, not, with some failings as well, like you said, in terms of institutions that need additional support and reform. But like those fundamentals are under assault by this right-wing movement to try to change our culture in ways that are deeply repressive and regressive.
Well, one book shout out that is along these lines. There's a great book. It just came out June 17th called American Scare. And it tells the story of the Johns Committee, which is like the McCarthy Committee here in Florida. But it accesses a lot of documents that they tried to redact and destroy. And it paints a picture that everyone should understand, because as you read it, you'll go, wow, this is the exact same playbook. This is precisely how they did it. This is how they set it up. But all of this documentation only exists because a researcher in the 70s kept her own copy. In the 70s, before they had enough shame to think of burying and doing away and redacting everything into oblivion. But how close we came to losing all of this history was uppermost in my mind in reading it. I'll try and get the author, Bobby Fiesler.
I put the link in.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal book and an eye-opener. And it talks not only about their attack on the LGBTQ community, but the primary motivation was to uproot and eliminate civil rights advocates from public life. Anyway, I'm not gonna tell you more, because we're gonna try and get Bobby on maybe next next week or the week after. But phenomenal book. Highly recommend.
Yes. And with that, we're at the top of the hour. And I know you have a great salute ready, Nadine.
Oh, we do. Yes, yes. So, yes, before we go, we end as always with the glass half full. We certainly have not ignored what's broken, but we do need to remind ourselves of what is still beautiful, still bold, and still possible. So, fill your cup, and here is our glass half full. And it's not our usual. We could have made freedom books our glass half full, but scientists in Brazil have discovered a protein that improves memory in Alzheimer's, and it is a major breakthrough. And it is the first time they have made the kind of breakthrough that doesn't just slow the progress, but is being shown to reverse. And there is, especially at a time when we are seeing scientific research being thwarted in our universities and funding from the federal government being cut, I think it is so important for us to lift up these breakthroughs, these moments, to remind people that, science and the deep investment in this kind of research is life-changing. And I know there's probably nobody listening whose life has not been affected by Alzheimer's, who have not had the experience of seeing somebody, what do they call it, the long goodbye, and maybe struggling themselves. And this is a breakthrough of proportions that we haven't seen in when it comes to Alzheimer's. So here's to hope, here's to breakthroughs, here's to science, and here's to everyone. Cheers. So thanks everybody for being here. I'm Nadine Smith, along with Lisa Graves. Thanks for making space for the 5-8.5, your midweek breather, and be sure to tune in on Friday at 8 p.m. for the 5-8 with Greg Oliar and Stephanie Koff. Hit the subscribe button and you'll get alerted. But most of all, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we will see you next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Good night.